Hey everyone, what's going on? And welcome to a very special episode of Sports Speak, episode 103. Happy Thursday night. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I am Tim Moore.
This is actually Tim Moore. We are not on a Zoom screen. We're recording this on Zoom. We don't have any guests today, but that's okay because we are live in person, a live remote from the Hampton Inn in Yonkers, New York. I'm up here for sports broadcasting camp, not that far away from where Tim lives. So we figured, why don't we get together, get some great dinner at the, the Mirage?
The Mirage, and I had no idea this was even happening tonight. So made it even more special for me. So this is going to be exciting.
I know, big surprise. We've got a lot to get to today. And the one thing that I'm really excited about, when you're on Zoom, the big problem is having a debate about something because, you try to avoid cutting people off, and Tim goes on his 6-minute Yankee rant sometimes. So now we can actually debate some hot topics today, but I want to start with something that I think we're going to agree on. Some big news in NASCAR yesterday. Tyler Reddick is heading to 2311 Racing. Kudos to him. But it's not till 2024, and it really was announced randomly out of nowhere in some virtual press conference with Denny Hamlin. And remember, this is for 2024. So the rest of this year and next year, he's still going to be racing with RCR. So this puts both of those organizations in a very awkward situation, especially Richard Childress Racing, who has a driver like Reddick, who certainly has the capability to go on deep runs in the postseason. And they're focused on that this year and next year. But, now the worry is 2024. What are they going to do? And who are they going to put with Austin Dillon?
Well, to me, it's all interesting in regards to what we're going to see, because the fact of the matter is this, is that, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but my big thing is that I really feel that NASCAR needs to stop drivers in general from making contract deals well before their contract is even over. I mean, obviously you mentioned a year left in the contract. That's going to be a big problematic issue for me for really one reason. And the fact of the matter is this, is that now this is going to, allow RCR time to prepare their drivers. My issue is that is Tyler Reddick now going to get the best equipment in the future, knowing that they're going to leave, for example, Brad Keselowski last year, where, granted, different situation, he was going into an ownership position. You feel like there was opportunity. But the big thing is this, is that NASCAR, unlike other sports, doesn't really have an off-season dynamic. And yes, silly season exists for those that may be NASCAR fans at home. But the big thing is this, that you have to remember, is that when it's all said and done, drivers signing contracts earlier doesn't create any excitement. I mean, I think about Casey Kane a few years ago, or I shouldn't say a few years, a long time ago now. I think about 8 years ago when he was going to be signed to be the replacement for Mark Martin. Obviously, Casey Kane turned around, waited a year. I forget the team. I know he drove the 51. But anyways, ended up sitting for a year. The same thing happened for Clint Boyer, actually, which is another most recent one before he went to Stuart Haas Racing. So really, it doesn't create any excitement for me. And my big issue with NASCAR is simply this. I think they need to create a system that will allow drivers to only negotiate during the off season, or if they're negotiating a re-sign process, then like in other professional sports, throughout the season, so that there is something to look forward to during the off season. Because I'm tired of non-big signings only being the only movement NASCAR has during the off season. You see a lot of the big guys, rather than moving up. For example, another one, Austin Cindric last year, we knew after Brad Keselowski left, he was going to be the guy, as well as, even all the way back to when Ryan Blaney moved up, or even now with Harrison Burton. We knew all this before the next season happened. To me, that's not exciting.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And you think about other sports as well. And NASCAR always is trying to see how can they compete with the stick and ball sports. And NBA, NFL, we've seen it with both of them this year, how exciting free agency has been. We're going to get to the NBA free agency, DeAndre Ayton, Kyrie, KD. That's all exciting storylines. And that all happened because everything happened at once and everybody was paying attention. NFL, same way. Yeah, that went on a little longer because, of course, with Tom Brady retiring, unretiring, Deshaun Watson, it's still going on because we have Baker Mayfield just went to the Panthers. We still don't know if Deshaun Watson's going to play, but really, NASCAR, I think, is missing out on an opportunity where they could get people interested if they made free agency, a standardized period. And it's ridiculous for Richard Childress Racing to now have their best driver not committed to the team, that's one thing. But now knowing for the next year and a half that he's not really, he's got one foot out the door, it's just a really weird and kind of unprecedented scenario. Because you mentioned, we were talking, Dale Jr., for example, that was in March when it was announced, but that was for the next season. Tyler Reddick still has a whole 36 race slate with RCR next year. And obviously this surprised Richard Childress Racing. And, this is a team Tyler Reddick got a chance with, won an Xfinity championship with. They've stuck with him when he couldn't win races until finally at Road America. It's just really baffling. And I really think it's necessary for a move to be made and a change to be made here to this NASCAR system. But I will say one argument to your point. You were mentioning how Clint Boyer, for example, when he has 1 year in the 15, Kurt Busch in the 51, I think that's fine. It makes those teams more competitive for a year, which is number one. And we see that in other sports too. For example, when Chris Paul went to the Oklahoma City Thunder in that trade, we knew Chris Paul was not going to be staying there for more than 1 year, but he made the best of that situation. Kurt Busch, when he had all those issues in the early 20 teens, driving that 51 that was unsponsored most weeks, he made the most of that car. He was consistently top 10, top 15. He was competing for a potential playoff spot. I don't think that's the problem. I think we can both agree that situations like this, with signings being announced 18 months before the change is actually going to be made, that's a real problem.
No, that is a real problem. But I also do want to present this question to you because this also just popped into my mind. Obviously we mentioned the worries about RCR. How are they going to focus next season? Obviously trying to pursue Tyler Reddick getting a championship this season after finally getting his first career win at Road America. But the other big question is this: what does this mean for 23XI? Because obviously we know for Denny Hamlin, he's announced, at least at this point in the season, that he's not putting any more of his funds until NASCAR is willing to make a change. Well, does that mean next year he's not going to be willing to put in funds, knowing the fact that he's likely going to bring in Tyler Reddick, or say, we already know he's bringing in Tyler Reddick, but he's likely going to be either adding another car or subtracting Kurt Busch due to retirement, or if he's going elsewhere. To me, it feels like this is more of an answer to say, I think that 23XI is going to be hoarding up funds next season, and then they're going to really try to pursue being a big program the following season. Very similar to kind of what Furniture Row was back with Martin Truex Jr., where I think you're really going to see this turnaround for this team in the next 2 seasons, which is why I'm going to say this, folks. I would expect 23XI next season to perform very similar to how it has this year. I think Kurt Busch is going to stick around. I really do. I think Kurt Busch is a good driver and provides a lot of them for sponsorship reasons. But I really do think that we're going to see them hold those funds 1 more year, especially for Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan, to turn around and make something that is going to be a dominant Toyota franchise along with Joe Gibbs Racing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think there is a path whether or not they keep Kurt Busch. Obviously, if Kurt Busch leaves, if he retires in 2023, or if he continues racing, because I could see that happen, he bounces around from team to team. You've got 2 cars, you've got Reddick, you've got Bubba Wallace. No matter what path they go, Bubba Wallace is still going to be developing over these next 2 years. He's been getting better and better. I know some people are going to pin things on him, but let's be honest, let's be frank. Most of the issues that Bubba Wallace has had this season have been because of his pit crew, and I think it's completely justified, and he's been getting frustrated with them.
And that's why Christopher Bell last week.
Yep.
Remember, they switched up the crews and a left rear tire changer. Ironically, the same tire issue that Bubba Wallace has been having all season long ends up coming off, thankfully, in the pits, but it ended up really costing Christopher Bell's race. And the big question is, while JGR continues to transition pit crews, does Christopher Bell also, and I think it was a fair question, I think Dave Moody asked it on Twitter, but it's a fair question. Is it fair to say that Christopher Bell right now does not feel like a priority? And the other question is, could he be on his way out the door, just like what we saw for Eric Jones just a few years ago in that 20? Because it seems like that car, since Matt Kenseth is left, has been the absolute weak link, unfortunately, for Joe Gibbs Racing.
All right. I said we were going to debate. I think this is the first time we're actually going to get into one, because I'm not going to agree with you there. I know Christopher Bell hasn't been able to get to victory lane much, just the 1 win at the Daytona Road Course last year. But let's be honest, none of these other Toyota drivers have really been showing out all that much aside from Kyle Busch this year. Martin Truex Jr., I'm a Truex fan. I think he's a little bit over the hill at this point. He's not the same.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that, because the thing about MTJ is, yes, while he hasn't won a race, you can make the same exact debate about Ryan Blaney. He's been consistent, and the point shown again. I feel like just like Denny Hamlin last year, at some point he's going to win. Denny Hamlin obviously has been the weak point, if I'm being honest. We all know that consistency-wise, don't get me wrong, he's won races, but he has not performed to the level he wants to be. But that does not mean he's not going to be a title threat, ladies and gentlemen. Denny in the playoffs, yes, career-wise has always choked, and for me, not that I hope failure in Denny Hamlin, but I always equate him to Mark Martin as going to be one of the greatest drivers to ever win a championship. But I feel of drivers that just simply haven't won this season. Christopher Bell last season started off strong, but to me, I feel like he's not getting as much focus from Gibbs, which is my problem. And I agree with you in regards that Toyota hasn't stood up, but I wouldn't say MTJ is exactly the weakest link. I also am excited to see what he does next year, because next year could be his final year of his career, unless Junior Motorsports has a plan for him in the future.
Well, that's fair, but Truex has certainly reached his zenith in his career. It came in 2017, 2018. I just feel like, and we know the story this year, a lot of the veteran drivers have struggled to adjust to the next gen car. Some did better than others. Kyle Busch is probably the best. Logano took a little bit of time. Hamlin as well. Harvick's trying to find his footing. I still don't think Truex has necessarily found his footing. And I feel like the tracks that he's doing well at, there were random weeks where he's really strong. A lot of times he doesn't close it out, but it just feels like it's kind of once in a while that happens. I feel like for one good week, he'll have 2 weeks where he's really not in the mix at all. One thing that really disappoints me too, road courses, when they first announced, 2 years ago, they were adding all these road courses to the schedule. Everybody thought, which two drivers is this going to benefit? Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr. Now, the next gen car really isn't that different on the road courses. I don't think it's that much of a change compared to how it is on the speedway tracks.
I would debate that. I would debate that for one reason in regards to the change, because you have to remember this, the way the body style is now with the independent suspension, there's a lot more grip for a lot of these guys, which means they're braking a lot more harder. And a big reason why, for example, if you go back to Daytona, when they were doing the dual races and why they were such a spread out in that race, outside the fact that the draft wasn't exactly ideal and these drivers still had to adapt to it, is the fact that these drivers now can either enter the pits a lot more harder, but also have a lot more on edge to play with, if that makes sense, folks at home. And what I mean by that is these cars are always on an edge. They're always on the edge of spinning, but there's an aspect of grip, kind of like a Formula One car and an Indy car, where there's opportunity to gain speed if you're playing on that edge appropriately. And needless to say, I think the big problem that what we are seeing at road courses, we're only seeing passes done in slow speed zones, which means, for example, at Road America, we saw where a lot of the high speed, the low speed zones, we saw a lot of chaos, especially for how Ross Chastain got the win, moving AJ Allmendinger and Alex Bowman out of the way. I think about Sonoma too, where's all the chaos in the final two corners, or I should say up on the hill where Kyle Busch spun, I believe that's turn 5, as well as turn 11. Really, for Watkins Glen, unfortunately, I think it's going to create a very difficult race because that's a fast course. But we saw at Road America as well, the same exact thing. So while I agree, I think that road course racing had a heavy emphasis with this new car. I feel that because there's so much grip, that's what's causing the issues with road course racing. And that's why we're not seeing as many passes as before.
That's fair. But let's also mention, Martin Truex Jr. was the second best driver on road courses, number 2 in the whole series, and he has done next to nothing at them this season.
But nor has Toyota. You can't forget about that. Think about how bad they were at Sonoma as a group. And the one thing I've noticed this year, folks, by the way, which goes back to team racing, that is the big issue that I've had. And you would think it sounds insane, but notice intermediate tracks. Rick Hendrick has been awful this season. And for example, New Hampshire, I guarantee you, Kyle Larson may be the only Hendrick driver that's inside the top 10 this week. In fact, I could almost place a bet on it. That's how confident I am. And it's the fact of the matter of these programs have had certain focuses all season long. And one thing where it seems like Joe Gibbs Racing has struggled this year has been road course racing. I mean, think about it. Kyle Busch has self-spun every single road course we've been to this season, practically in the same corners. They had engine issues. Gibbs, remember, I think it was Las Vegas earlier on the season. Everyone as a whole in the Toyota team had engine issues. And I think the big thing is, again, we're seeing organizational racing come back to life as compared to what we were seeing in past years with the Gen 6. And it all depends. Like another team I will say, and I'm sure this will be debated a little bit too, is I feel that the biggest letdown team of the big programs, in my opinion, has been Penske. Don't get me wrong, Joey Logano has won 2 races, Austin Cindric won the Daytona 500, but I expected Penske to at least be somewhat of a powerhouse this season. And the fact that they're running mid top 15 to top 20 in a lot of races, and they're not consistent in races is a little bit disappointing because, for example, tracks like Las Vegas mile and a halves have been Ford's expertise over the last 3-4 years. And along with the big step down for Stuart Haas, I mean, yes, Chase Briscoe won a race, but Kevin Harvick has not been anything again this season. Cole Custer got his first top 10 since Dover last season. And it's upsetting to see that Ford, in my opinion, has taken a step down with this next gen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not going to debate you on that because I agree. Penske has been very disappointing. But to circle back to my original point here, Christopher Bell, I still think there is potential. I don't think he's been necessarily the weak link. I think everybody except for Kyle Busch on that team at some point has been a weak link. Christopher Bell at some points, yes, but Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr. Hamlin at the beginning of the season, certainly. Truex at the tracks that we expect Truex to be good at, he's not coming through. We're still seeing drivers like Kyle Busch and Joey Logano, who may be, veterans of the series and adjusted kind of, were challenged by the new type of car. They've still been able to kind of figure their way out at those tracks. Martin Truex Jr. has not. And, this is coming from someone who's a huge Truex supporter, Garden State, born and raised, but that hurt. I feel like he's holding them down right now more than Christopher Bell.
Even though he's top 6 in the standings, though? That's where Bell's barely in the top 10. He's 10th in the standings behind Alex Bowman, who I feel like has been more consistent than William Byron, even though Byron has won 2 races this year. But I feel like there's been a lot of chaos, and Bell's right on the cusp of the top 10. And again, not having a bad season, but I just personally don't feel like he's been a priority for Gibbs because outside of qualifying speed, that team has shown nothing race pace-wise this season.
That's fair, but I like how you mentioned priorities because that leads into my point here. Martin Truex Jr. coming into the season, and as he is the case every season, is expected to be a championship contender. Are they really expecting that from Christopher Bell? No, Christopher Bell is still a young driver. They expect him to be a playoff driver. I still think there's a very good chance he gets into the playoffs, whether he points his way in if they don't get 16 winners, or if he gets his way to victory lane, because he has been close a couple of times this season. But Truex was expected to be a championship contender. He has not been able to get to victory lane, and there's still work to be done, and he's not performing well at the tracks that you would expect him for. But all in all, the whole story here is this. Toyota is kind of in a weird spot right now. You've got JGR with potentially drivers on the outs. Let's not forget there's a lot of uncertainty with Kyle Busch's situation after the end of this season. M&M's is gone as his primary sponsor.
I still don't believe that, by the way. I truthfully believe that Kyle Busch has a sponsor. It's just more of Joe Gibbs is playing it a little bit down, just like how we did last year with Ty Gibbs, if you remember we knew Monster, of course, was going to stick along with him, but he was looking for a full-time sponsor for Ty. And even when he got sponsors, he even put him on a car because he wanted to set things up for a lifetime sponsor. And of course, Kyle Busch doesn't exactly need a lifetime sponsor. Of course, we know he owns Rowdy Energy, which is his own energy drink company. But the fact of the matter is, I think there's more to that story. I think Kyle Busch is just trying to play it to turn around and really set his narrative for the offseason.
Well, I'm going to leave the NASCAR debate at this right now. We're going to come back to NASCAR at the end because there's 2 things I want to talk about. We did not get to Noah Gragson and the Road America situation in our last episode. We're going to talk about that. And 2 years ago, we debated NASCAR's GOAT. And
we're going to go to war on this.
Yes, me and Tim had very different opinions on this situation. So we're going to circle back to NASCAR at the end. But let's transition from the track to the court. The NBA, free agency, DeAndre Ayton is a restricted free agent. The Pacers want him. There were rumors about that for a couple of weeks. 4-year contract, $130+ million. The Suns are going to have to match it. It's the highest offering from another team to a restricted free agent in the history of the NBA. And if I'm the Suns, I match this. I do. I think DeAndre Ayton is forgotten about a lot for how important he is on that Phoenix team. And, you're in a Western Conference, and sure, we talk about the dynamic guards and the forwards and such. You're going to have a lot of good teams with really reliable centers next season that they're going to have to match up with. The Lakers, in theory, Anthony Davis is going to be there. Nikola Jokic, 2-time MVP, he's going to be there. Minnesota has so much height now that Karl Anthony Towns is going to be playing the 4, and you've got the Stifle Tower at the 5. Memphis, really good year for Jonas Valanciunas, top 5 in points and rebounds for centers. Those are 4 teams that are going to be competing in the postseason next year. And, they're going to have reliable centers. Didn't even mention the Warriors, for example. They have Kevon Looney, Draymond Green, say what you want. He can still play great defense, even though he's a little undersized and a little bit past his prime. So Phoenix, I think you need that big man. Yeah, you've got Chris Paul. Yeah, you've got Devin Booker and then Mikal Bridges defensively. Those are 3 guards, essentially. You need a big man to kind of lock down that paint and be someone reliable you can kick it to inside if Booker's having an off game. And we also have to remember, Chris Paul is almost 40 years old. You wonder if there's going to be a point where he has a drop-off. And, we've seen it, with Dwayne Wade, for example, who's I'd say is a similar player to Chris Paul. Obviously, Wade a shooting guard, Paul a point guard. But I think there's a lot of similarities there. And we saw Wade have a significant drop-off when he went from Miami to Cleveland. And I think Chris Paul maybe might be approaching that because the second half of last season, he really started to not look like himself. And obviously during the playoffs, he had a couple of absolutely horrible games against the Dallas Mavericks. But I want to get your opinion here. DeAndre Ayton, it's a good move for the Pacers, and should the Suns try to match the offer?
Well, of course, it's a good move for the Pacers because when it's all said and done, the Pacers need a lot of help. I mean, you think all the way back to a few years ago when the team had Victor Oladipo and looked to have a lot of promise. The team in a transition and a rebuild is trying to get themselves back to where they need to be, and DeAndre Ayton for them is a good pickup. Now, my thing though is that yes, I agree. You need a good center. A lot of the good teams in the NBA, their dominant forces, have really good big men. But the only way I can see the Suns not matching this deal is the fact that they're going to be all in on Kevin Durant. I think that is the only way we can see this happening. Because when it's all said and done, let's be honest, I still think, and based upon our last episode, I really think for Brooklyn, it's either you do one or the other. It's either you trade both away, otherwise, because again, you can't flip Kyrie Irving for Russell Westbrook. That's not happening. Kevin Durant will not play with Russell Westbrook. That's just 2 people that do not go together anymore, unfortunately, because they just don't get along. So the fact of the matter is that, I think that they're all in on Kevin Durant, and I think it's a big signing, or I should say big trade for them if they can get it done. But to me, I think you've got to match the offer sheet with Ayton only if they're not pursuing Kevin Durant. But if they are, in my opinion, nothing against DeAndre Ayton, really good player, really good big man. But when it's all said and done, again, big reason why too they made the NBA Finals a few years ago, or say 2 seasons ago. But when it's all said and done, how can you say no to Kevin Durant? That's the big thing. I think Kevin Durant he was my pick for MVP this last season. He could still play great basketball while he's still somewhat at a step down from his injury. I still really do think Kevin Durant can be that piece that can get the Suns to a championship.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And, last episode we were theorizing if they get traded, where would be the best fit? And I want to bring that up again because I want to look at it not as much from the perspective of Durant or Kyrie this time, but more so of the Nets, how they can make the most of this. And, I always wonder what Kevin Durant really wants. And, would he consider going to the Warriors? Because, I saw a proposed trade package that if the Nets made it, I would love it. Kevin Durant goes to Golden State. The Warriors send back Andrew Wiggins, Jordan Poole, James Wiseman, and Kuminga. Those are 4 players who are going to be able to play. Andrew Wiggins, whether you like it or not, was an all-star starter this season and was the star of a Game 5 finals win for Golden State. Then you've got Jordan Poole, who emerged as a starting caliber player who on the Nets would shine because he's not overstaged by Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. James Wiseman, I know he's been injury riddled to begin his career, but hey, so was Joel Embiid. We saw what he turned into. James Wiseman, when he's been available, has been an excellent player, and as a center would provide a much more reliable 5 for Brooklyn than Nick Claxton, and Jonathan Kuminga is another nice player as well. And then all of a sudden you got the Warriors. If Durant is back with Curry, Thompson, Green, Iguodala, and Looney, you run it back with those 6 who got you 2 championships. Yeah, it wouldn't look great for Kevin Durant, but I don't think he really cares what people view him. He just wants his rings. If I'm the Nets, to me, that would be the offer I'd like most.
Well, and I would agree that I would like that offer most if the Golden State Warriors can offer that. But the other big thing is this, is that it still confuses me about the Kevin Durant situation, because it's more of this. Kevin Durant says he wants to go win a championship on his own, but then after really 2 seasons of Durant playing, of course it's through 3, but when it's all said and done, giving up on that dream. And then the big beef that Kevin Durant also has is that he wants to be viewed as the best player in the NBA, and he feels that he's always overshaded by LeBron. And of course, guys like Curry and Lillard always come into that situation. And to me, it's more of, if you go back to Golden State, you're just saying, I'm here for rings. I don't care about anything else. And that's what means most to him. And again, if winning a championship and proving his legacy is going to do that for him, great. But to me, what's going to make more for Kevin Durant's legacy is the fact that he could finally carry a team by himself and really just shut the haters up. And it's that simple. But unfortunately for Kevin Durant, I just don't see it to be that way. It's either he's going to go to a big player team. And again, I still felt that he needed a lot more help in Brooklyn. It's disappointing that team did not win a championship and never surpassed expectations, especially considering the fact that they were able to get James Harden, Blake Griffin, who I know was regressing. But that team either way on paper should have been able to win games and should have been able to win a championship. I feel the same way still. If the Nets were not to trade anyone, this team on paper could win the East, but the problem is they need depth. And the only way, unfortunately, the Nets can get depth, which goes back to your point about the trade, I think it works out if that's to be the case, because the Nets, to rebuild, you need depth. But I'm also, in my opinion, outside of the Kevin Durant trade, I'm more worried about a potential other trade in New York with Donovan Mitchell, because to me, I don't want to see Donovan Mitchell be in New York, Nick. But that's just me. While it means something home story wise, why would you want to go from a situation of a regressing team that has made the playoffs every year, that even without Rudy Gobert will still make the playoffs, to come play for the New York Knicks that hasn't won anything in over 20 years?
Well, what have the Utah Jazz won? I mean, I know the Knicks haven't been to the playoffs.
At least the Jazz have been a 1 seed.
Yeah, but there's nobody else there in Utah now. They traded Royce O'Neal. They traded
Rudy Gobert isn't winning them games. Royce O'Neal's just a minutes player. He does nothing statistically.
Patrick Beverly is. I mean,
But they have Jordan Clarkson. They're not losing much. And I'm not saying I want him to stay in Utah. I want him to be traded from Utah. But the fact of the matter is, why go from a situation to the factory of sadness? It doesn't make sense. He can't change the factory of sadness. If you're telling me Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving couldn't change the Brooklyn Nets, you're telling me Donovan Mitchell's going to change the New York Knicks?
Well, the New York Knicks have already made some positive change. And listen, this is coming from a Nets fan. I make fun of the Knicks constantly. And I think they overpaid for Jalen Brunson. That being said, he's on the roster now. He's their point guard. He's going to excel. His dad's an assistant coach there now. He wants to be there. I don't think Julius Randle is going to be nearly as bad as he was last year. Was 2 years ago a fluke? I think it was, but I think he's going to improve from last year. I don't think they're going to get 2 bad seasons in a row. And if there's a way that they could bring Donovan Mitchell in without having to give up RJ Barrett,
they probably will.
They probably
Let's be realistic.
Would. Yeah.
There's no way, after trading away Royce O'Neal to Brooklyn and getting the picks, I feel the only way Donovan gets traded is if RJ Barrett's in that deal.
So fair. Then let's do that. So let's say they have Jalen Brunson. You put Donovan Mitchell at the 2. Is Fournier still on the roster?
Oh, I don't know. I think his year was a 2-year deal.
Yeah,
obviously, I know Ken was gone, so we know that.
Yeah, so then you go with Fournier at the 2. You got Donovan Mitchell at the 3. If you trade away Barrett, you could go with Randall at the 4, Mitchell Robinson at the 5. That's a good group. And then we know the youth the Knicks have. They'd have to give up at least one of them in a trade like this.
Did Ricky Rubio re-sign a contract? I think he did.
I think so.
Because I would love to see Ricky Rubio come be in New York, Nick. Yeah. I think that his connection with Ricky Rubio is great. And of course, I know Ricky wouldn't start. But I think, honestly, Rubio played his best when he was playing with Donovan from a scoring perspective, which I think, again, could help the Knicks. My big criticism of the New York Knicks is the fact that they've never had a shooter. Donovan, for the record, Dwayne Wade-style player, but Donovan is just a solid shooter beyond the arc. He just shoots a lot of threes. I think that the fact of the matter is that the Knicks need to find some more shooters. Obviously, Fournier wasn't the answer, and while the Knicks did shoot a lot more threes last season, I still think that if they can get Donovan Mitchell in, they're going to need some help with that, because I don't know if they can win a championship or be a competitive playoff team until that comes to be.
That's fair, but who was a great playoff 3-point shooter? Jalen Brunson, and he's on the roster now. And Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson together, that is a very nice combination. And if you throw them in with Randall, let's say if the Knicks, for example, to get Donovan Mitchell, just being realistic, because let's also not forget, Rudy Gobert has completely, in some ways, ruined the market, just like he shut down the entire world 2 years ago. But the trade that the Timberwolves, with as much as they gave up, has thrown off the balance for any of these other trades. And that might be the reason KD and Kyrie don't get traded.
He's playing for arguably the most controversial owner in baseball, or say not owner, but player in baseball history. And now he's playing for Alex Rodriguez. And what is, might I add, one of the most confusing situations on what's going to happen to that team. I actually, this isn't again of debating, is Rudy Gobert going to be good in Minnesota? Rudy Gobert is going to be good in Minnesota, but what does this mean for Karl-Anthony Towns? What does this mean for this team in general? Because where it felt like Minnesota was starting to step up, starting to get better, it's the fact of the matter of, I don't know what to expect because there's a lot of what ifs. And it's kind of like, for example, a few seasons ago with what happened to Kristaps Porzingis, where he got traded away from the Knicks for a lot of value. And then he got put into a situation that just wasn't best for him. And the team didn't excel. And I'm not saying that's going to happen in Minnesota, but the fact of the matter is now this team's got a lot of talent defensively. I just don't know how they're going to excel because you're talking about two big guys. Obviously, Towns won a 3-point contest this year and can shoot, but it's the fact of the matter of you got to give these guys minutes and give them big minutes, and who knows what's to expect because you're asking for a lot out of two big men and you could be risking injury.
Yeah, and Karl-Anthony Towns too, kind of getting relegated from the role of being a center. I mean, that's got to hurt his confidence a little bit for someone who has stuck with Minnesota through some really, really bad years. And, you know, all of a sudden, Rudy Gobert's their center. Anthony Edwards, deservedly so, is getting a lot of attention. Karl-Anthony Towns is kind of getting forgotten about when he was the best player on this team for 6 years. So I kind of feel bad for him, but I want to circle back to the Knicks. You know, I like this move. If they try to bring in Donovan Mitchell, I think he'd be good for the city. And I think New York is due to try to make a move like that. And I think if you traded for Mitchell, if you got Donovan Mitchell, you sent back RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, Jericho Sims, and 2 first-round draft picks, maybe a third pick. I think you could make that work. RJ Barrett ascended last year to be a really solid player. And if the Knicks do that, all of a sudden, like I said, a lineup with Fournier, Brunson, Mitchell, Randall, and Mitchell Robinson, Obi Toppin, Deuce McBride, Quinn Grimes off the bench, and probably Derrick Rose, I assume, would be back as well. That's a 9-player rotation that you could certainly live with. And I think the Knicks roster would be as good and definitely better than the group that they had 2 years ago when they made the playoffs.
Well, let me ask you this. If it's not the New York Knicks for Donovan Mitchell, where else? That's the question, because while a lot of people are going to say Miami, I just don't know if Miami can really afford Donovan Mitchell. And what I mean by that is you have to remember Donovan just re-signed a contract with Utah the last season, which was essentially a max deal for a rookie offer. So the fact of the matter is for Donovan, you know, if you're getting him, you're going to have him for another, I think it's 3 seasons. I don't remember if it was a 4 or 5 year deal, but either way, you're going to have him for multiple seasons. And the fact of the matter is, again, going to the point of, you're going to have to trade a star. So does that mean that Miami's going to turn around and trade Jimmy Butler?
They're not going to do that, but that's the problem. They're in like a weird prisoner's dilemma. There's nothing you can do to make this work because you can't trade Jimmy Butler away. But if you bring Donovan Mitchell in, remember what was the big problem for Miami in that series? They could not hit 3-pointers. That was disastrous. That one game where their whole starting lineup only had 18 points, they couldn't hit any threes. They have a couple of good 3-point shooters on the team, Strus, Duncan Robinson. Those would be the guys you'd have to trade. Bam Adebayo would be someone you'd have to trade. Those are the roles that they need. They need a big, they need, shooters that can shoot from deep. Donovan Mitchell, Jimmy Butler, not going to give you that. We saw Jimmy Butler, by the way, this year, clashing with his own coach and with Udonis Haslem on the sideline. How is he going to feel if you bring in somebody else who plays essentially the same position and the same style of game as him when Jimmy Butler thinks he's the face of this team and has honestly deserved that credit because 2 of the last 3 years, he's carried them on deep playoff runs?
No, that's absolutely true. But I think the thing is for Miami too is, turning around and being a 1 seed and while having a disappointing playoff is the fact that they weren't able to shoot in the big moments. My question for them is moving forward, what do you do differently this offseason to help you win a championship? Because obviously it wasn't enough in the bubble. It wasn't enough this year. Something's going to have to change in that dynamic of that franchise. And unfortunately, again, while getting Donovan is a step up and I get player feelings and so on, I just think the fact of the matter is that team needs change. And again, with all the situations of trading for people, bringing people in, Miami's in a very complex situation, which goes back to my point of why I don't see him really being a number one option there. I see him being on a team in the Eastern Conference, not as much the West, but it's more of a fact of the matter of if it's not the Knicks, I really don't know where Donovan Mitchell's going.
I want to conclude with this because I want to talk about the Miami Heat a little bit. This is a team, and Colin Cowherd was making this argument the other day, and I don't agree with Colin Cowherd a lot, but he said that they shouldn't be trying to trade for any of these stars, and his argument was 100% correct. Miami is a team that's always run well. Think about how many different iterations of that squad since Pat Riley became involved with them in the late 90s have gone on deep playoff runs. Late 90s, when they were getting in brawls with the Knicks every year. Then you had the Dwayne Wade era. You had the LeBron era, Jimmy Butler era. That's four completely different eras with these, aside from Dwayne Wade overlapping in two of them, completely different players. Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, both excellent pieces on the team and, in the organization rather. Why does Miami want to screw up a good situation when they went to the championship 3 years ago, forced Boston to a game 7 this past year? Celtics, there's a chance they have a little bit of a hangover after going on that deep playoff run last year. Milwaukee, as we saw, when they lose somebody, they completely fall apart. Philadelphia, I do not trust James Harden. The Nets are in free fall. Miami is in a perfect situation with the group that they have, and those guys are continuing to develop between Hero and Robinson and Strus. Those are guys, not much NBA experience. More is going to come as we keep going along. Losing PJ Tucker is significant, but I think they're still going to be able to grab a couple of veterans. There's a lot of older guys out there on the free agent market. I'd say someone maybe like Carmelo Anthony. He hasn't gotten signed yet. He was productive in the games he played for the Lakers last year. He can still score 15 points when you need it off the bench and play some solid defense. As over the hill as you might think he is, he still can be a contributing piece. And, he'd love to be hanging out in South Beach for the year.
Well, and let me ask you this question too on the topic of Carmelo Anthony and going back to the point about the New York Knicks as well. If they trade for Donovan Mitchell, could you see Carmelo Anthony being a piece add to the New York Knicks? Considering, again, I know he's still looking for the championship, but really Knicks fans wouldn't mind if he came back to New York.
Yeah, Carmelo Anthony is very well liked in New York City. I like that move potentially if Melo went back to the Knicks. I think he'd thrive there. Let's also not forget the Knicks try to make Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson out to be superstars. And I'm not undermining my previous point. I still think the Knicks are going to be a good team this year, but Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle are not superstars. Knicks fans make it seem like they are. They are not. Neither was Kristaps Porzingis. Carmelo Anthony is the one superstar they have had since 2000. He chose to, he was traded there, chose to stay, stayed through some good years, stayed through some bad years, and spent a good portion of the prime of his career in New York at Madison Square Garden when there's so much pressure on him. I think he'd be a great fit for them off the bench. We've seen Derrick Rose go there and honestly thrive. Rose's career looked like it was largely shot. He came back and he played a key role in the Knicks each of the last 2 seasons. I think Carmelo Anthony could do that again, and he'd be welcomed back, with open arms. But go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I think he'll be welcome back in open arms. But I think also the big thing, too, is if you bring Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks, it could lead to other players that, while they may be older, could turn around and give the Knicks some depth, which, again, goes back to my whole point of I could see the Knicks, if they trade for Donovan Mitchell, being a contender, but when it's all said and done, it's more of, I don't see them winning a championship unless they add depth in it. While it's far of a different situation compared to Brooklyn, I think that Melo, again, I give him all the respect in the world for what he's been able to do in New York throughout his career. But the fact of the matter is it's his time, to shine, and his time's quickly running out. And I think it would be still disappointing if he comes out without a ring in his career.
Yeah, but he's only going to go there if Donovan Mitchell came. I think, or if they somehow got another superstar. I think Donovan Mitchell's the only one where there's, any sort of a chance that he'd go to the Knicks. But because I think there's a little special class of people in the NBA that I'd just call ring hoppers, that they go from team to team every single season and they're trying to get a ring. Melo's there, Rajon Rondo, DeMarcus Cousins.
But DeMarcus Cousins doesn't even play. He hardly can stay on the court.
Yeah, I mean, he played some decent minutes.
I'll make an argument. Dwight Howard.
Well, Dwight Howard,
Dwight Howard's definitely a ring hopper.
Dwight Howard, DeMarcus Cousins, PJ Tucker, though he's productive and plays a big role in the teams. I'd call him a ring hopper because he goes from team to team every single year. And like I said, Carmelo Anthony, Rajon Rondo. They're all still out there with the exception of Tucker. I'm honestly interested, and this is, going back to why I love free agency. These guys don't play that big of a role in their teams. I'm interested to see once the landscape is shaken out, once the Nets make a decision on Kyrie and KD, where do those guys sign? Because they still play key roles in those teams. Rajon Rondo played a very huge, impact. He had a huge impact on the Lakers team back in 2020 in the bubble that won the championship. Dwight Howard did as well. Carmelo Anthony on that Portland team a couple years ago was still really good. They're DeMarcus Cousins when he went to the Warriors. He played some significant minutes with the Clippers that one year. I think those guys, despite not being what they used to be, still have pretty key roles in the teams that they're on. PJ Tucker, of course, I'd still say is a top 10 defensive player in the NBA, even at 36 years old. So those guys are going to be very fun to watch in NBA free agency. And we'll still have to see more to go. Within 48 hours from this afternoon, the Suns are going to have to try to match the offer that the Pacers have for restricted free agent DeAndre Ayton. And of course, I know we'll be talking more NBA next episode, but it's mid-July, and then, training camp is not far away, and lots been going on in the NFL, but I want to talk about the Carolina Panthers making their trade for Baker Mayfield. Now, the fact that Baker Mayfield has now been traded for a 5th-round pick, that's what it ended up turning into. But
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Chaotic. And the Panthers are just such a disaster at this point, and I always thought they were a pretty well-run franchise. But that whole situation last year when they were going to treat the quarterback situation like it was a bullpen and you could bring in Cam Newton and Sam Darnold.
You thought they were a well-run franchise?
I mean, they made
Dave Gettleman ran the Panthers.
They went to the Super Bowl with Cam Newton.
Dave Gettleman ran the Carolina Panthers. We saw what he did in New York. Cam Newton's career died after not diving for a fumble. The Panthers franchise is a joke. Not as much as the New York Jets, not as much as the New York Giants, but the Panthers are a joke. Absolute joke. And they traded for Baker Mayfield for, in my opinion, a steal nothing. If I was the New York Giants, I'd be hoping they traded a 4th-round pick for Baker Mayfield. It's sad that the Browns traded away their quarterback for nothing. They don't even know who's going to be under center come week 1. And the situation's disappointing, but for me, it's Baker Mayfield. He's not a top-tier superstar quarterback like we hoped he was going to be. But the fact of the matter is this, it's actually a good move for Carolina. So I don't see why people are so frustrated about it. Retaining Sam Darnold, that was a terrible idea, don't get me wrong. But I like the move for Baker Mayfield. And I think, honestly, Baker Mayfield's worth a lot more than a 5th-round pick.
I'm torn about that. Now, first of all, you know what, before we get back to that, I got to finish off this argument because what I'm saying, the Panthers are a poorly run organization right now. But 2015, 2016, that team felt like they had good direction and, they had made some key moves. They had brought in Greg Olsen, Luke Kuechly. They had, they'd come, but they'd also lock them up on contract. You had Josh Norman at that time, Cam Newton, that was a nice organization then, and then it kind of fell apart. Then Ron Rivera was gotten rid of. I think Ron Rivera was kind of what held that whole team together, and Ron Rivera doesn't really work anywhere else. He hasn't fit well with the Commanders, and Carolina was the right place for Ron Rivera. But back to this, I agree with you. Baker Mayfield, I think, had better value than a 5th-round pick. I think it's a steal for the Panthers, and maybe Baker Mayfield can go back to how he was, pre-2020 and the injury and such. He's not a great quarterback. I mean, we've had Joshua Franks on the show before, and he said that Baker Mayfield is potentially a top 5 quarterback. I'm not.
That's a bit insane. That's a bit over the top.
Yeah, that's a little much. I think there's still the chance that he could be successful, and he's better than Sam Darnold. He's better than whatever Cam Newton has become now. But it's not pushing Carolina over the hill because, I mean, as crazy as it might sound, it still could potentially get them to 2nd in the NFC South because the Saints now are in a sort of a rebuild and the Falcons no more Matt Ryan?
See, I'll debate that a little bit for the Saints because while they're on a quote unquote rebuild, I would just like to remind you that Jameis Winston is still their quarterback. And before the injury last year, Jameis Winston played really good football. I am convinced that Jameis Winston is a good quarterback, not an elite quarterback, but he is a good enough quarterback for the Saints to win games. Now, the Falcons, give up on the Falcons. I'm sorry. That team is, since the Super Bowl run, has been disproportioned, mismanaged. They traded away Matt Ryan, obviously, now to Indianapolis, and they don't have their best wide receiver. Obviously, they traded away a regressing Julio Jones, and who even knows what's going to happen in regards to Julio after, for this season beyond with how inconsistent he was. But the fact of the matter is that even with a solid draft, I guess you could say, for the Falcons, the team's still not good enough to win games, in my opinion, consistently to be an above 500 team. We know the Bucs are going to be a title threat until Tom Brady retires. That's just the fact of the matter. But for the Panthers, I mean, they have some targets. You have Christian McCaffrey. God forbid he's healthy. Fingers crossed. But to me, the Panthers defense hasn't been terrible. They've been pretty solid. It's just the fact of the matter of, I think Baker Mayfield is quality. For example, again, I go back to my Giants point. You want to compare him to Daniel Jones. He's far better than Daniel Jones. And it goes back to my point too of where I'm frustrated why I feel Baker Mayfield is worth more. I'd like to remind you that Teddy Bridgewater was traded, I believe, from the Jets for a second-round pick. So when it's all said and done, you're telling me Teddy Bridgewater is a better quarterback than Baker Mayfield? That to me doesn't justify it. I mean, I know Jared Goff with a lot of money gets traded to Detroit and you have a whole Stafford trade and so on, but I view Baker Mayfield to be better than Jared Goff. So it's like, to me, I just don't think it's fair to say that Baker Mayfield is as bad as what he was traded for, and it gives no value to the Browns. I just think the Browns, I'm not saying that he was going to be worth a first-round pick, but for the Browns, this just makes no sense. Yes, I know you traded for Deshaun Watson, but who even says you're going to have Deshaun Watson? I mean, we hear conflicting reports every single day. Yesterday, I heard it was 4 to 6 games. Today, I heard it was going to be a season to a season and a half. Nobody knows what's going on. And until that happens, just like, for example, with the Trevor Bauer situation on the baseball side, you can't make an assumption of what's going to happen and base around on it until it happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the Dodgers did a good job with that. They brought in Max Scherzer for the rental and stuff, and this season they bolstered their pitching staff. They knew that there was potentially something to happen with Trevor Bauer, and if they got him back early, then they'd be happy about him. They'd have him on the field. But Deshaun Watson, I think, is going to be gone for a while. That's why I was hesitant in some ways about the Browns even trading Baker Mayfield at all. But in some ways you kind of had to, because they of course gave $200+ million to someone else to replace Baker Mayfield. And this is once again why the Cleveland Browns are, as Tim loves to say, a factory of sadness.
But I thought they traded that to us, though. I thought they traded it to the Giants when we traded away Odell Beckham Jr., because we haven't done anything positive. But I will say I'm a little bit confident this season that with a weak schedule, we could be near 500, not above 500. I'm not saying we're going to be a playoff team, but I've got some confidence.
Near 500. Okay, let's talk about this, because I wanted to get into this. NFC East, the 4 teams: Cowboys, Eagles, Commanders, Giants. How do you rank them going into the season?
Cowboys are number 1. I don't think that's a debate. Kellen Moore's offense is impressive, and I don't care the fact that it came down to a QB draw for their season last season. The fact of the matter is even losing Amari Cooper, that offense with Dak Prescott is still a powerhouse, and I think Dak does deserve a little bit more respect in terms of the elite quarterback conversation in the NFL. I think the last few seasons he's had an injury-riddled line, which has also led to his eventual injury. So I think the Cowboys are definitely up there. But then I know this is going to sound crazy, but then when I'm looking at 2, I'm still tied between Philadelphia and New York, because my thing about Jalen Hurts is I need to see the consistency. That's the thing. Jalen Hurts could be a good quarterback, but he's the only good quarterback I've ever seen in NFL history that is having the debate of, is his job going to be the starting quarterback going not into this season, but the season after? But then we still want to debate the fact that he's a good quarterback in the NFL, because to me, that doesn't justify. Hurts has games where he's on fire, and then he's 1 for 15, it feels like.
But you're saying the Giants are tied with the Eagles in your mind?
The Giants defense is far better than the Eagles. What might I forget? I know the Eagles, whatever last season was only wins against below 500 teams, and we can't ignore that. But the fact of the matter is this, is that the Eagles still, yes, they traded for a first-round pick for a wide receiver, but who says A.J. Brown's even going to be as good as what he was in Tennessee? Because remember, and I know folks are going to say this is insane, because yes, A.J. Brown is a great athlete as a wide receiver, but hey, it's easy to get catches and get open when you're run committing every play to stop Derrick Henry. So I don't know how he fits into that Eagles offense, if I'm being honest. He's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver if healthy, but I don't see him being a big add-on that's going to win them a division, in my opinion.
All right, two things on that argument to completely shut that down. Number one, A.J. Brown was still just as productive when Leonte Foreman was their running back and Derrick Henry was hurt for most of last season. Number two, Ryan Tannehill was getting him the ball. Jalen Hurts and Ryan Tannehill are not that far apart in terms of talent. And the Eagles, this is also a better overall receiving core, I'd argue, that Brown is with than what he had in Tennessee.
But what about defense?
Defensively, they drafted Jordan Davis. You got Fletcher Cox. You still got Darius Slay.
But you're hoping on Fletcher Cox. You're hoping on a player that is aging and regressing. You can't forget about that.
True, but he stays healthy. He's been one of the consistent healthy players.
But that's like the Cowboys focusing on, DeMarcus Lawrence and hoping that he's going to be something. I think that the more again, not everyone can be consistent every year, on the defensive end. For example, granted, I know he wasn't aging when he retired, but not everyone, for example, could be Luke Kuechly, where it's guaranteed 100 tackles every year. You look at DeMarcus Lawrence, he got hurt every other season of late, and it's like, how can you argue that he is an elite defensive end in the NFL, just like a Fletcher Cox? Yes, he's been healthy, but he's regressed drastically. That can you even call him an elite defensive tackle? And I'll even go to the debate about J.J. Watt, for example. How can you say J.J. Watt's example if he plays one game every 3 seasons?
Well, yeah, I don't know where J.J. Watt's even tying into this, but the Giants, how about the fact, at least the Eagles, I have some faith that they're going to be somewhat consistent. Your running back gets hurt every single year, and your quarterback trips over himself.
We have Matt Breida, okay? Matt Breida, in my opinion, was the best halfback in Buffalo. Devin Singletary had nothing on him. I'm sorry. I wish he had more opportunities. My man fumbled once and they stopped giving him the ball. His yards per carry looked very solid, and he's fast. That's what the Giants need, is somebody that's explosive. Saquon Barkley, since his ACL injury, isn't explosive. And I'm not saying the offense is going to tear things up, but Eddie, I think my argument with the Giants has nothing to do with the fact I think this team is far better than beyond last year. It's the fact that you have to look at the teams they're playing. They're playing the Texans, who doesn't have a quarterback. Yes, Davis Mills could be the answer, but who says Davis Mills, with having nobody to protect him still outside of Laramie Tunsil, may not get hurt by the end of week 3? They're going to potentially play teams this year like the Jacksonville Jaguars and like the Chicago Bears that could still see struggles like they did last season. There's a lot of very weak teams in the NFL that they're going to see.
Yeah.
And that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah, but the AFC South, sure is a very dysfunctional division. The entire NFC East is playing them. Eagles are going to be playing them too. Eagles are going to be extra motivated to beat Jacksonville because it's against Doug Peterson.
But the Eagles have to play a lot more winning teams this year on the NFC side. You got to remember that. Same thing as well with the Dallas Cowboys. The way the division shakes down, obviously I think the NFC East is facing the whole NFC North this year, correct?
Yes.
Because I know the Giants are playing Green Bay in London, which I think is an awful, awful thing for the Giants. That's going to be a blowout game in the benefit of Green Bay. But then again, I don't know how Aaron Rodgers would be in London. I hope he plays like he does in Florida in London, and hope the Giants have a chance. But the fact of the matter is that, hey, the Giants play the entirety of the NFC North, and the fact of the matter is the way you cycle it around, listen, that means that the Cowboys, for example, have to turn around and they have to play, the best team in the NFC West last year. I forget if it's for the Eagles, I forget if it's the 49ers this year that you're playing, or if it's the Cardinals.
I think it's San Francisco. Yeah.
So it's either way. Like, you have to see competitive teams, is all I'm saying, in the NFC side, because everything's based upon last season's record. And I'm not saying the team's not better from last season, but if you're basing upon last season, the Eagles only beat above 500 teams. The Cowboys, majority of their wins was below 500 teams as well, but at least they had some competitive wins against playoff teams. That's the reason why I'm saying saying of the Giants have an opportunity because they're facing those weaker teams that, might I add, still have problems going into this year and haven't solved themselves. I mean, the Giants have to play the Panthers this year. We saw what they did last season. They ruined Sam Darnold's career, and sure, they may still have Baker Mayfield.
You were just defending Baker Mayfield going there.
Wait. Is Christian McCaffrey going to be healthy by the time the Giants play them?
Is Saquon Barkley going to be healthy for the Giants?
No, but we
is
don't
Matt
need
Breida the savior of the entire team?
Kenny Galladay is the savior of the New York Giants.
He didn't have a touchdown. Oh my God!
Listen, the Giants don't need Kenny Galladay. They need Kadarius Toney. That's all the Giants need.
He was having the game of his life and he punched someone during the Cowboys game and got ejected. How can you trust this man?
Listen, Daniel Jones is not an elite quarterback. Be honest, and I know we're having a good little laugh about this. Daniel Jones is not an elite quarterback, but he's a solid quarterback. And I believe with Daboll's offense that this team can do something positively. I'm not saying they're going to dominate. I'm not saying they're going to score 30 points a game. But I am confident the Giants are going to be a lot better this year than they were the last 3 years. And that's coming from somebody that thinks Joe Judge is the best coach we've had the last 3 years, or I said last 3 spans. I really thought that Tom Coughlin, of course, going through his old transition, legendary career. But listen, I think Pat Shurmur, great offensive coordinator. I think that's what his specialty is. He wasn't a good head coach. Don't even get me started about the other bozo, because I can close my eyes and literally call exactly what is being called with my eyes closed. It was either a halfback dive or a first down screenplay, because apparently Eli doesn't know how to throw 5 to 10 yards downfield, which is a lie, because we all know Eli Manning, give him his respects, while he wasn't an elite quarterback, could still throw for solid yards. Yes, the deep accuracy goes down. Same thing happened to Drew Brees, but Eli was still a decent enough quarterback for you to win games. The fact of the matter is, though, is that when it's all said and done, the Giants needed the right people to come into this organization to change it. And the fact of the matter is that I think this team's a lot better than what it was. The team, unfortunately for me in the NFC East, that's just falling apart. Franchise is falling apart. No one even knows what's going to happen. Is simply Washington.
This is where I'm very torn about Washington, because the defense on paper is supposed to be good. And I know Chase Young got hurt last year, but it's not just him. And the defense did not perform well. I think there's a chance the defense turns around. I also think Carson Wentz is going to play decently well, just like he did in Indianapolis. Then he'll have his stupid throws where he tries to shovel pass and throws interceptions. But I think the big question, we still don't know what's going to happen with Terry McLaurin. If he's if he's playing, because we see NFL players hold out.
Didn't they give him an extension?
Did they give him the extension?
I thought they gave him an extension. It was a massive extension too, where he's going to make a lot of money. Not Damian Lillard money, of course, on the NBA side, but I thought I saw that he was getting an extension the last time I checked. I could be wrong. Shame on me for not confirming that first, but I believe he had gotten a 2-year extension.
Well, if that's the case, then I feel even better about Washington, because that gives Carson Wentz someone trustworthy to throw the ball to. I think the Giants are going to make positive strides this year. But you were talking about how Pat Shurmur's deal was that he maxed out as an offensive coordinator. How do we know that Brian Daboll is going to translate that well? And also, how do we know for sure that Brian Daboll is the reason that Josh Allen became Josh Allen? And it wasn't just because Josh Allen was, playing in Buffalo, had the players to complement him, and it was just a really good quarterback who just happened to be overlooked in high school and ended up having to play at Wyoming.
Well, it's more of, for me, is what Daboll talks about. Like, whereas, to go back to Joe Judge, where I feel like, again, Joe Judge wasn't a bad coach. He had a terrible system. It's more of Daboll's able to give explanation and give you a lot more insight than a lot of past Giants coaches, where I feel like he's a lot more open in explaining the changes of the system and what he feels creates a proper flowing offense. And I'm not saying he's Bill Belichick by any means, but Bill Belichick, for example, if you give him an innovative question enough, he will talk about football with you and how he sees and views pieces fitting fitting in. For example, I look at the draft, right, where, there was a lot of rumors of Kadarius Toney because he didn't show up to camp initially getting traded. The Giants said, hey, why can't we have more than one Kadarius Toney? Just because they're the similar play style doesn't mean we're turning around and we're trading away Kadarius and we want the other. It's more of the fact that for the Giants, they view that, hey, you need more versatile players. And the big thing, my argument about the New York Giants is that they've been playing old style football for about now 10, 20 years, it feels like. Even since Eli Manning's been under center, and even before that, the Giants aren't playing modern football. They're always playing an era behind. Defense, that's a little bit different because we know how treacherous the Giants defense has been able to adjust. Even during the struggles, you can say the defense has been the strong point for New York. But on the offensive end, it hasn't been that way. And I feel if you can just adjust Daniel Jones a little bit, and again, it's always being hopeful. I personally don't believe Daniel Jones is that guy, but if we can just get the rookie year Daniel Jones minus the fumbles, I think he can be competitive enough for the Giants to win games. And the other thing too is, listen, if he doesn't pan out, I do want to point this out. This guy does not get enough credit. Never got enough credit playing in Buffalo. But the fact of the matter is Tyrod Taylor is not a bad quarterback. Mm-hmm. And I really do think he can win football games. He helped the Browns. And yes, I know the Browns had the whole situation where eventually Baker replaced him. But the fact of the matter is Tyrod doesn't play bad football. He's just a completion percentage quarterback that doesn't pad the stats. Very similar to, well, I don't want to give the comparison, but I guess you could say very similar to Teddy Bridgewater with more accuracy. He plays good clock burning football.
More mobility too.
Exactly. More mobility and really gets you involved in big minutes and really helps you get time of possession, which I think a big thing the Giants needed, because outside of the inability to score, having control of the football and controlling the pace of the game is a big impact in football when trying to maintain momentum. And the Giants were never able to do that over, in my opinion, the last 2-3 seasons with Joe Judge's coach, because they never had a fluent offense to really establish that pace. The Giants made a big pick, they turn around, they'd have a 3-and-out. They make a big stop, fumble, they'd at most get a field goal. And yes, some of that comes in the aspect of execution, trying to score the offense, not being in flow. But if you can't stand up in those big moments and burn clock in big moments, you have situations, for example, like in Washington during, I think it was Thursday Night Football earlier this season, where the Giants were down, had the big pick with James Bradbury, turn around, killed the time, and they end up losing because they didn't execute when they needed to.
Yeah. You've said some crazy things in the show before, specifically with Tim Tebow as a tight end, but defending that the Giants are going to be equivalent to the Eagles and using Matt Breida as your reason, I don't even want to.
Matt Breida is a solid halfback. He is a solid halfback. Listen, I'm not praising Antoine Williams. That's the other. The Giants signed everyone from Buffalo. Everyone from Buffalo. I feel Matt Breida is a solid back that didn't get much opportunity. We saw obviously what he did, all the way back in, San Francisco. But the fact of the matter is that Matt Breida just hasn't had much opportunity to really expose himself as an every down back. And he's not going to be that for New York. But if Saquon Barkley gets hurt, then I hope he is that. Because again, just like how last year I felt there was a different pace for the Giants offensively when you switched Barkley in and out on downs, I feel like you're going to get that same production this year.
All right, that's enough of that. But I want to get back to NASCAR to finish up the last 10-15 minutes or so of this show. We haven't really discussed this enough. We talked about it a little bit when the Ty Gibbs, Sam Mayer thing happened with the fight at Martinsville. And the NASCAR Xfinity Series is promoted as this development series, of course, where the future stars of the sport, shine and expose themselves. And, you start to see them and they're going to be future, expected to be big in the future for NASCAR. And probably the two biggest names right now are Ty Gibbs and Noah Gragson. And we know there's been a lot of drama with Ty Gibbs, with how he races other people, and of course the fight with Sam Mayer at Martinsville, though the last few weeks have not been that big of a deal, and he's gained my respect in a big way for how he raced Kyle Larson at the end of that Road America race 2 weeks ago. Noah Gragson, though, did something that was pretty bad, completely dumping Sage Karam on a straightaway, taking out 13 cars, nearly injuring Brandon Brown. And, I have never been a fan of Noah Gragson. I've said it before on this show. I do not like the attitude that he brings. Even after that, he was still blaming it on Sage Karam. I don't know how well Noah Gragson is going to translate to NASCAR. I know there are people who love when NASCAR drivers have personality. And one of the biggest critiques for some of the drivers that have come up over the last few years, specifically the year that Chase Elliott and Ryan Blaney came to the series, is that they have little to no personality. Chase Elliott has no personality whatsoever. Noah Gragson does. But Noah Gragson is beyond, to me, Kyle Busch. It's Kyle Busch in his younger days. You know, there was a lot of scandals with him. Noah Gragson, to me, takes it a step too far. Between the whole incident on pit road last year at Atlanta with Daniel Hemrick, there's a track record now consistently of Noah Gragson having these very scandalous incidents and very controversial incidents. And I want to ask you, is it concerning to you about the level of immaturity among the Xfinity Series supposed top stars?
I feel like it is a little bit concerning, but I mean, you mentioned the Hemrick incident last year. Going back and viewing it, I don't really know if that was intentional, in my opinion, because then if you got the other pit box angle, it really did generally look like he was backing up and accidentally went way too far from where he could see. And I'm not saying that wasn't intentional, but it was more the fact of the matter of when you got to see other angles, it was up for debate, which is why I'm saying that last year, I can excuse that. But what he did at Road America, not acceptable at all. And the fact of the matter is this: it doesn't matter what you race if you race in real life, whatever, but if that was anybody else, somebody was getting suspended. Somebody was getting tossed. There would have been fines. And of course, Noah Gragson did get a fine. But at the end of the day, what does his points penalty do? He dropped the mighty fourth to the standings, to fourth in the standings. He didn't lose anything from that. If I was NASCAR, in my opinion, I would have doubled that fine from what he got, and I would have doubled the points penalty. It would have been a race and a half. Because the fact of the matter is, he cost teams thousands of dollars, turned around, blatantly wrecked people. Almost hurt, obviously mentioned Brandon Brown. And while, yeah, that could play a little bit into the circumstance, the fact of the matter is that, listen, the big problem that Cup drivers have with a lot of guys in the Xfinity system, for example, Ty Gibbs, is the fact that they don't feel these guys are coming up with respect. And this goes back to my point about the Xfinity series. While, yes, they've needed to adapt, create new stars by limiting Cup Series drivers being in the field, you have to remember this. I truthfully feel that the talents we're seeing in Xfinity are not as good as what they're portrayed to be because of the fact that they're not consistently on a regular basis facing some of NASCAR's best drivers. For example, I go back to years where there's a lot of hype over Christopher Bell, a lot of hype about Eric Jones, and there was a lot of comparisons to them being Kyle Busch. And obviously, we know today Eric Jones is far from a Kyle Busch. Christopher Bell, while he has a dirt racing background, is very different. They're their own personalities. The fact of the matter is that they're not as good as what they were anticipated to be. Guys like Cole Custer, remember, he dominated Xfinity's last season. And by the way, he's proven to be a very solid Xfinity driver, but he's not a good Cup Series driver. A lot of these guys, and it goes back to my argument about in the Cup Series of who's good, who's not. If you're good and you're going to win races, you're going to show it immediately, which goes to my point about Austin Cindric I said last season, which you debated me on. I feel Austin Cindric, granted this rookie campaign hasn't been the best for him, winning the Daytona 500 and having a good couple performances shows the fact that he can be a player in the Cup Series. He can run around the top 10. Good drivers, just like the NFL. Good drivers, just like good quarterbacks, show something spectacular even if they aren't winning. And I'm not saying that Noah Gragson, for the record, and his opportunities in the Cup Series has shown some potential. A lot of it's been at plate tracks, though. But my big issue is that these Xfinity guys, I feel, going back to the point of the problem, is that you're not racing anybody big for most part. And yes, while Noah Gragson, did turn around and race Kyle Larson and so on, it's more the fact that if you're not racing the best of the best on a weekly basis, it's no surprise that there's going to be carelessness in the fact that you think you're better than other people because you're performing well in these lower series. I mean, it's very present as well in the Truck Series, in my opinion. If you think about it, a lot of guys that are constant front runners. I mean, think about Ben Rhodes a few years ago. So to me, it's concerning because there's carelessness, and NASCAR needs to shut it down because incidents like this will only continue to happen. And I think about the past, Kyle Busch, Matt Kenseth, right? They intentionally wrecked someone. What happened? They got suspended. In the case of Kyle Busch, I think it was 2 races. I don't think it was just one for the weekend.
Yeah.
Matt Kenseth was also 2 weekends.
Yep.
So the fact of the matter is that there needs to be justification. And I'm not saying take away Noah Gragson's playoffs, but it's disappointing to see. And really, a lot of the fine money should have went back to the teams, in my opinion, because there's a lot of low budget teams that got involved in that. And now they have to rebuild a race car that they can't afford. That's not fair to them.
Yeah, that's to me the biggest point of it all, because the Xfinity Series, let's be honest, more than half of the cars that are out there are very underfunded. And more than half of the cars that were involved in that wreck were underfunded teams. And that's just really frustrating for Noah Gragson, who of course is driving for Junior Motorsports, which is probably the only consistently strongly funded team in the entire series, seeing that something like that happen. I mean, of a multi-car team. I mean, Joe gets racing.
I think it's
as well,
fair, although
yeah.
RCR is really proven still that they can be a consistent powerhouse up there as well.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I'm not saying that until this year. Obviously, the Cup Series program has really stepped up the next gen, but you would say of past years, very reminiscent of the Jack Roush situation, where I'm not saying they're going broke by any means, but it's more of their lower tier programs have dominated their Cup Series program.
Yeah, that is true, but it's just a weird situation and a weird time for NASCAR, because I feel like a lot of these, guys who have come out of the Xfinity Series, ever since Chase Elliott, none of these guys have really been able to live up to the hype. And then once again, you're in this sort of conundrum if you're NASCAR, because in some ways you don't want to be letting these drivers bushwhack down in the series. And trust me, the next debate, we're going to talk about that a little more. And I don't like having those guys bushwhacking. But at the same time, Ty Gibbs, I think, learned a lot 2 weeks ago when he raced Kyle Larson at Road America, learned how to race one of the best drivers in the world, clean, to win a race. And he's the one, to me, just when I saw how quickly, as soon as he got into the Xfinity Series, how he was just able to dominate. And I don't care if he's driving for Joe Gibbs Racing, because we've seen people drive for JGR who have not looked good. Brandon Jones has been with that team since 2018. Brandon Jones ain't doing what Ty Gibbs is doing on a weekly basis. Ty Gibbs, I think, is the best prospect since Chase Elliott. And whenever he gets the call, I think he's going to be a consistent playoff driver right away and could consistently be one of the top 10 drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series.
I'm not debating that at all. I think Ty Gibbs is one of the futures in NASCAR. And listen, not a lot of people are going to like him because he's young, but listen, not a lot of people like Joey Logano when he was young either. And the fact of the matter is, even if it takes him a year or two to adapt, I think it won't be the Logano situation for him, because of course he's going to have a, not to say pop situation, but he's going to have his grandfather's funding. It's going to be the fact of, I really do think he's going to have all the support behind him. And listen, he's going to have good teammates, rather if it's going to be after MTJ leaves next season, or the fact that it could be Christopher Bell on the way out. I still think Kyle Busch is going to be there. Let's be honest. Yeah. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon, but he's going to have good people around him to help him only get better. And I agree with you. I think that you're going to see success from Ty Gibbs. And I think if you circle around those drivers, he, like Chase Elliott, is that kid. I really think he's going to be a Cup Series champion within the first 10 years of his career.
Yeah, I agree with that. But my whole thing too, Noah Gragson, it's just setting a bad precedent if NASCAR doesn't do anything about it. And it's just frustrating when he probably is the second biggest prospect right now in the Xfinity Series behind Ty Gibbs, when he's doing stuff like that, really proving he is not ready for the Cup stage. But I am certainly ready for this debate that we are going to bring back after 2 years, the NASCAR GOAT debate. And, it's hard in every sport to compare people from different eras. And for the people who watch this and, might mock NASCAR or whatever about driving cars and turning left, this is a sport where different eras, it's really true, because the cars are completely different between the eras. And I will say, it's fair to say the competition was very different. There was no Xfinity and Truck Series when Richard Petty and David Pearson raced. It's a completely different time now. But Tim, I'm just going to sit aside and let you give your top 5, and then I'll see how I feel after you say this.
So number one, in my opinion, I'm going to go with Dale Earnhardt. And I know Richard Petty is always in the debate, but I still feel the Intimidator is the greatest driver to ever live on the face of this earth. I think that the influential point that he's had on NASCAR has obviously played a big factor. And listen, I know there's a lot of drivers of recent that have that rough up mentality, but there's nobody, in my opinion, that is more intimidating in your mirror or the fact that has much of a personality as there is Dale Earnhardt. Now, I will say Richard Petty's number two. I think that's fair to give him the king, 200 wins. That earns its own respect. Number three, in my opinion, maybe David Pearson. I think the fact of the matter is Pearson deserves respect in regards to what he was able to do. And I know why he doesn't have the accolades to Petty. The fact of the matter is he did race in a competitive era and he had a lot of talent in that regard. But where you may start to disagree with me, in my opinion, will probably be around the 4 or 5. Because in my opinion, you have to start tipping around guys again that have had an influential impact. And I know you're going to disagree. I still think Kyle Busch is a top 5 driver. I'm not saying he's better than Jimmy Johnson. I'm not saying he's better than Jeff Gordon.
Wait a second. Well, we've done 3. But let's do the math here.
Hold on. I'll get to that. I feel that Jeff Gordon, even though he didn't have the championships, in terms of what he's been able to do for NASCAR and so on, puts him over Jimmy Johnson at number 4. But I feel Kyle Busch deserves his respect at number 5. And it's the fact of the matter this. And listen, I know you're going to disagree with this, but Kyle Busch wins in every single thing he drives in. Think about it. Kyle Larson at some point later on in his career, if he turns on to win more championships and drives, he will be in this debate too. But Kyle Busch has literally won everything but the exception of the Chili Bowl there is to win in racing. And he has talent. And I understand, yes, he raced in the Truck Series, he raced in the Xfinity Series, but you can make that same exact argument about Kevin Harvick, who, by the way, hasn't won in 2 seasons. And while, yes, Kyle Busch did back into a win this season, you just made the point of Kyle Busch has been the most consistent thing on Gibbs, and he's been the most consistent driver in NASCAR now for the last 10 years, in my opinion. He's won 2 championships. If he wins one more, I think it's fair to say that he is arguably one of the top 5 drivers in all time. And again, I know the fact that it's not 200 Cup wins, but Richard Petty also raced in an era where you could cheat the engine, cheat the fuel. There was no boundaries in NASCAR. And I give Pearson that respect, but there's a lot more restrictions and technology for what we have today. And again, I think Kyle Busch is the top 5 driver of all time. And that's coming from someone that is not a Kyle Busch fan. I was a Dale Earnhardt Jr. fan. My mom hates Kyle Busch, and I think he earns that respect.
All right. Now, Kyle Busch, you made him seem like he's Mario Andretti. What is this argument that he's won everything that he could possibly win? The Chili Bowl, you're making it seem like he wins the Indy 500 and all these things. Okay.
He's won a snowball derby. He's won a lot of things in terms of dirt and other things. Kyle Busch, you have to remember, growing up, was coming through the system, was a very high talented prospect. It just happened to land under Rick Hendrick. Both of the Bushes, Kurt Busch's too, were very talented. The difference is Kyle Busch has the accolades and the winning to prove it.
I still don't understand your argument, though. How are you you're saying Jimmy Johnson and
Jimmy Johnson won
Kyle Busch,
Jimmy Johnson won titles, but Jimmy Johnson won titles. Don't get me wrong, 7 championships does mean a lot, but the era Jimmy Johnson won 7 championships is a little bit, a little bit questionable. And I agree that a lot of people will say that, yeah, you have to give the 7 championships respect. But for example, I guarantee you if Kyle Busch turned around and went to IndyCar right now, he'd be doing a lot better than Jimmy Johnson. I can almost guarantee it. I'm not saying he's going to be winning races, but for example, we saw Kurt Busch be competitive in the Indy 500. You don't think Kyle Busch could be?
All right, let me just give my list here. Number one, I agree with you. I think Dale Earnhardt has the GOAT mentality. Just some of these stories, and another reason why I say Michael Jordan is the GOAT of the NBA. There's certain things that Dale Earnhardt and Michael Jordan have done in their sports that nobody else can. Dale Earnhardt's last career win is still one of the most iconic things with that comeback. Just the way he could supposedly see the air, everything with rattling his cage. There is simply nobody like him. I agree with you at number 2 as well. Richard Petty, 200 wins, 200 Cup Series wins. That matters a lot to me. regardless of what era it was.
But let me ask you this. When you're racing 60 races a year, almost double of what the current Cup Series schedule is, his win total also should be a lot higher than what it's been, especially when he dominates a series that, again, at that time, which was my point, which I don't want to discredit David Pearson for the record, folks, but it's the fact of the matter of they raced in a time where there was no restrictions. Remember, NASCAR had a whole holdout going into a season because they felt the Hemi engine was too overpowered, and then Richard Petty went to drag racing, killed people, and then came back into NASCAR.
I get that. But listen, you're making the argument about the competition and stuff. Well, you had Dale Earnhardt number 1 and David Pearson number 3, right? At least one of those guys was racing against Richard Petty for 90% of his career. It's not like he was racing against nobody. The vast majority of his career, he was against people that, were top 3 all time on your list. So 1 and 2, I stay the same with you. I put Jeff Gordon above David Pearson. I'd say Gordon is 3, Pearson is 4. And regardless of how you feel about the format, Jimmie Johnson is still a 7-time NASCAR champion and won 5 consecutive championships. And won championships under 3 different playoff formats. I think you have to put him at number 5.
Are you giving the Kareem debate to this? This is my question, because here's the thing. If you remember, Kareem had a debate about Jordan, if you remember, of why he doesn't believe Jordan is the greatest of all time. And this goes to the point of this. Well, it's the fact of the matter of I had the game change around me to turn around and prevent me from doing well. Do you feel that's the same for Jimmie Johnson? Because I feel like that's not exactly why. I mean, Jimmie Johnson had a big impact on why the chase became to be and change, but I don't feel the chase was made for Jimmie Johnson to not do well. It was more change to make more involvement. And might I add, what's been a very poor NASCAR ran system until of late of not listening to the fans and just trying to make up some BS reviews.
But I still listen, and this is why a few weeks ago when we were talking about Steph Curry and all time, and I give a lot of credit to Curry, at least to me, and I like that argument about Kareem. I like the argument that you rate players higher who forced changes to the league that they were in. Steph Curry has transformed the NBA because of his three-point shot. He's the greatest three-point shooter in history. Every team now is committed to the three-point shot. Whether you think that's changed the game for better or for worse is your own opinion, but it's significantly changed the game because everybody wants to shoot threes and wants to have their own Steph Curry, but they're not going to have that because there's only one Steph Curry. NASCAR, I think, still reacted when Jimmie Johnson kept winning the championship under the old system. They wanted to make it a little more interesting. That's why I got to put him in the top 5. What has NASCAR done during the Kyle Busch's career to make changes? And I don't want to make the argument here about Xfinity and trucks, preventing bushwhackers from coming into the
I would say Kevin Harvick, not Kyle Busch, is the reason why that happened. Yeah. Because Kevin Harvick, what he did in 2001 and then turned around and won the Busch Series championship again. Now, Kyle Busch, of course, came to play, but I don't think he had all to do with that. And, well, again, I do agree that is a valid argument. My thing about Jimmie Johnson is the fact that you have to remember he adapted to one style car, and that was Car of Tomorrow after the Gen 4, and that's where he really spiked his amount of success. But after the Gen 6 came to be, and of course, obviously, we didn't get to see him in the next gen, but Jimmie Johnson kind of faded, very similar to Kevin Harvick, right? Kevin Harvick was very good in the era of the Car of Tomorrow and the Gen 6 format. He wasn't a bad driver, don't get me wrong, in the Gen 4 era. He was still young, he was still developing, but he didn't have as much success, just like now how he's currently not having success with the next gen. It's not his style car. I feel Jimmie Johnson is a style driver. He succeeded with a very good, interesting talent of a car, but I don't feel like, for example, Kyle Busch has been successful in everything he's driven. He's one of the few that you can say has seen every modern style cup body we have left in NASCAR. Only him and Kevin Harvick can say that right now, and Kurt Busch.
That's fair, but okay, so first of all, let me just explain my rationale for why Jimmie is below Jeff and David Pearson. Jimmie Johnson's peak was much shorter than them, and Jimmie Johnson, whether you attribute the crash at Pocono to any of this, he fell like a rock during the last 2 seasons. And clearly that was not because of Hendrick necessarily. I know Hendrick was not as great in 19 and 20 as they've been the last 2 years, but you still had Chase Elliott running well consistently. You still had Bowman and Byron, and Jimmie Johnson was scuffling behind. And we saw that 48 team as soon as Jimmie was gone with Alex Bowman last year, win some races. That's why he's number 5. But because of the changes that had to be made, and because of the fact, I don't care what point system it was, Jimmy Johnson won 5 consecutive NASCAR championships in a period that we are all arguing is probably one of the most, competitive eras in NASCAR, when you had, young drivers like Tim's favorite Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin was there.
Kyle Busch is not my favorite driver. I'm an Alex Bowman fan. You know this.
Kyle.
But well, hold on. Let me ask you this, though, because Jimmy Johnson ran down Xfinity, didn't win a race. He ran down the Truck Series, a couple of starts, if I'm not mistaken, and didn't find any success. Kyle Busch has.
A couple, but Kyle Busch became so dependent on doing that all the time and often causing trouble in those series. That's still annoying.
Okay, like causing trouble in what regard? I know what he did when he was younger with the whole Ron Hornaday situation, but Kyle Busch went down, dominated races, in my opinion, helped make younger talent better by having to compete around him, because then you could say, hey, this guy's competing with Kyle Busch. He may be the real deal. You can't forget about that. And while yes, a lot of it was KBM trucks. I get that issue, and KBM's really progressed since Kyle hasn't been able to race down there. But the fact of the matter is this, is that you can't ignore the fact that Kyle Busch has been able to go in any car find success, whereas Jimmy Johnson only found his success in the Cup Series.
But the Truck Series is not hard to find success in, and Jimmy Johnson made very few starts.
But is it? But is it not? Because I haven't seen Dale Jr. go down there and win a race. I haven't seen MTJ. MTJ won, one Truck Series race?
But how often are they racing down there? Kyle Busch has all of those wins because he was consistently going down the Truck Series to race and had his own team there, which was, of course, supported heavily and had a lot of sponsorship.
If that was that easy, what about John Hunter Nemechek? Shouldn't he have won a championship by now, since we think he's a cup-level driver with some talent?
All right, well, we're not comparing Kyle Busch to John Hunter Nemechek in terms of talent.
But I really feel, for example, even Kevin Harvick's come down and done things, and Kevin Harvick, outside of one Busch Series championship, or I should say, well, he has 2, but the one Busch Series championship that really changed NASCAR's dynamic, we haven't seen him turn around and completely dominate. Same thing what about Kyle Larson? Remember Kyle Larson? And how about this one, Tyler Reddick? Tyler Reddick has been running both Busch and Cup practically full time, exploiting NASCAR's rule currently of getting starts and opportunities, and we don't see him dominating. And you have to remember this too, now with the whole changed format, which we haven't talked about, we're starting to see Cup Series drivers try to get lower funded teams involved into the sport, and they're racing with these lower funded teams to get them involved. And while I know Kyle Busch hasn't gone that exact direction, he could still, in my opinion, do that and find success.
It just frustrates me because, you know what? I wish Kyle Busch would do that. I would, and I'd feel a little better about that. But where he is right now, he's padding stats. And, he had to basically be pressured to stop running Xfinity races. And he still shows up for the truck races. Honestly, hasn't done all that good this year in those truck starts because his own trucks have been outrunning him on multiple occasions. But listen, and I've made the same argument when we did this 2 years ago, because for the people who watch this show and aren't that familiar with NASCAR, the Truck Series is the 3rd level series. So that is basically like NASCAR's AA affiliate. There are drivers there who are 17 and 18 years old. There are drivers in that series at the short tracks who are not old enough to get their official driver's license in some states in the United States of America. You've got other drivers there who never made it. Matt Crafton, Johnny Sauter, that's the best they can do. And then you've got other drivers there who are absolutely terrible, who, have not been able to get above that at all. Some that are 60, 65 years old, ones that are, getting suspended for putting swastikas on toaster strudels. That's the mix you have sometimes in the Truck Series. And, when you see Kyle Busch going down there and dominating those guys, it's not that much of an accomplishment to me.
But why is nobody else doing it? Why is nobody else dominating? That do go down there.
But there's nobody else that's as involved with it as Kyle Busch.
But see, Kyle Busch, I feel like he's stepped down over the last few years compared to other drivers. Again, I'll argue Ross Chastain, right? We saw Ross Chastain flip around between Xfinity and practically running a full-time Cup schedule before he ended up joining Ganassi and now the split off. I feel that there's a lot of guys that have been exploiting the rule to an extent, and we're not seeing them have success, and they are solid Cup Series drivers.
All right, well, okay. Ross Chastain is an anomaly, and you know that. First of all, he had so much bad luck against him with his career between everything that happened with DC Solar and then switching points with everything with Nice Motorsports and going on that run with them. And then now he's just turned into one of the best drivers in the Cup Series. And it's been probably one of the biggest surprise seasons we've seen from any driver in the Cup Series in recent years. He's not running consistently all the time in the Truck and Xfinity Series like he used to. And when he was doing that was when he did not have a significant full-time ride in the Cup Series. As soon as last year came, he got that opportunity with Ganassi, and obviously now with Trackhouse. Sure, he'll occasionally make a start for Nice Motorsports because he still feels a loyalty to them because they were the team that really got his career on the map. He's not making many starts down there. And when he does, he's fast too. I mean, he's right there. And a lot of times when he's in a race with Kyle Busch in the Truck Series, it's Kyle Busch one, Ross Chastain two. And, I'm not making the argument that Ross Chastain is a better driver all time than Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch, I'd say you can make the argument is in the top 10, but I don't think it's fair to put him in the top 5 above 3 7-time champions, David Pearson and Jeff Gordon.
But the win totals add up. And again, I still feel if Kyle Busch were to drop the Cup Series, turn around and win a Truck Series championship, he's a Triple Crown champion. You can't ignore that. Who else has been a Triple Crown champion?
So what you're saying? He's gonna what's your hypothetical thing? He dropped down from the Cup Series, go run the trucks and win the championship. Of course, he'd win the championship if he was in the Truck Series.
The fact of the matter is, you have to give it respect. It's all different aspects of driving. The next gen this year, don't get me wrong, they made it a lot more difficult, which is what NASCAR needed. They wanted it to be the most difficult car. The Truck Series are practically almost nearly wide open. That was the big argument about Gen 6, mile and a half racing is practically almost like pack racing, and short tracks and road courses kind of You're obviously seeing a lot of Cup guys get opportunities in Truck Series races at road courses, but it's a different style. In Xfinity, it's its own style. Each car is its own different style. And it goes back to my point. And to go back even a few years earlier, I mean, I'll compare now drivers that we do consider potentially be all-time greats, maybe not top 5 all-time greats, but what about guys like Brad Keselowski, Carl Edwards? Obviously, Brad Keselowski won an Xfinity Series championship and eventually Cup Series championship, but he even raced Truck Series, owned his own team, turned around and didn't find that amount of success. Carl Edwards did, he won races, but he wasn't competing with Kyle Busch when the two went toe-to-toe. Kevin Harvick, obviously, through that comparison, as well as outside of one championship before Kyle Busch even spiked to his prime, he wasn't as much competing as compared to other Cup drivers that have gone down through more recent history, which is why I think Kyle Busch is unique.
That's fair. And I'm not all of those guys that you just talked to, I'm not saying that they are ahead of Kyle Busch all time. I mean, you know what? If you want me to run down the full list that I have, I've got Earnhardt 1, Petty 2, Gordon 3, Pearson 4, Johnson 5. Then when you get outside of that, I think Cale Yarborough deserves a lot of high praise. I'd put him number 6. You talk about driver versatility and being able to do things in all kinds of cars. Tony Stewart has a 3-time champion. We've seen him have success in IndyCar, SRX, dirt, you name it. I'd put him number 7. And then 8, I'd say Darrell Waltrip, and then Kyle Busch 9. I don't know if you can put him behind DW. That's a little bit tough. And I think I understand Tony Stewart found a lot of success in all facets of racing. For me, Tony Stewart would probably be my number 7 or 8, because for me, Jimmy Johnson would be 6. For me, Jimmy Johnson wouldn't be top 5. I agree with you, Cale Yarborough. In my opinion, he would be my number 7. Tony Stewart would be right up there at 8. Again, you can kind of argue the debate between both Yarborough and Tony Stewart. I agree with that. Tony Stewart's another great example. The difference, though, from Tony is the fact, though, that for Tony, there was years where he had up and down years, where, for example, the year after he won a championship, he ended up bogging down, not finding success. Kyle Busch wins every single year of his career. While he doesn't dominate his sport, we're talking about him competing for a championship every year. We hadn't had to do that with Tony Stewart. Yeah, but there's also been multiple years where Kyle Busch has been largely silent for much of the season. I forgot which season that was when it took him until late in the year at Texas. I think that was 2020.
3 years ago. 3 years ago. 2 years ago. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But that was also during the pandemic. And what is Kyle Busch's thing? And this goes back to the debate too of, Kyle Busch, why does he run in the lower series? Because it gives him seat time and opportunity to understand the track a little bit more and give him more information. Kyle Busch has always been a big practice guy. Big reason why he's been doing a lot more successful this year is because he's getting on-track opportunity, even if it's limited, to make him better. And while you have to remember that too, I think the fact of the matter is that when you compare the two, again, I know Tony Stewart's a very great driver, but I just feel that Tony didn't mesh all-time personalities. I agree, Tony Stewart's in the top 5 all-time personalities. I don't think anybody can argue that. But Tony Stewart's a top 10 driver. I just don't view him better than Kyle Busch. I think that's, a little bit, I don't want to say disrespectful, Kyle Busch, because it's not, but it's a little bit of a stretch because, again, while Tony won multiple championships, it's more of the fact that still, I don't feel Tony's had the biggest influence compared to Kyle Busch has.
All right, fair. But I want to just mention one more thing that you talked about with the practice and the practice time. I think 2020 was a bigger test for Cup drivers than anybody might think. I think 2020 in many sports, for example, LeMickey or whatever, bubble championship was hard. It was a weird scenario away from your family in the NBA. Lakers deserve a lot of credit for that. The Dodgers, I know it was only a 60-game season. It was a weird year, weird playoff format. The fact that they were able to power through that, they deserve the credit. The drivers that succeeded in 2020, remember NASCAR post-pandemic had no practice, no qualifying. You just go right on track and race. If that doesn't give you a good assessment of pure drivers, I don't know what will. And there was not many changes.
Hold on, remember who was in that field? Jimmy Johnson. And what did Jimmy Johnson not do during that season?
Okay, but I already told you that Jimmy Johnson was shot by the end of his career. I'm assessing Jimmy Johnson really why he's top 5 of all time is because what he did from when he was a rookie in 2002 until that weekend at Pocono in 2018. Over those 16-year career, he was 16-year time as a top 5 driver of all time. I'm not holding, it against Richard Petty that the last 5 years of his career, he was a borderline danger on the track. I'm not holding the end of the career, and I don't do that in any of these rankings. With Michael Jordan, I'm not holding the Wizards days against him. I'm not doing that with Jimmy Johnson. But my thing is this. Kyle Busch was still in the prime of his career in 2020. There was no big changes to the car. He was the reigning Cup Series champion, and he was largely silent in that season because there was no practice and no qualifying. And I think if you're assessing the best drivers of all time, I think it's very important to assess which drivers can succeed in weird situations like that, where you're going into the car without practicing at all and you straight up drive. And Kyle Busch and Gibbs had speed that season. Don't forget that too. Martin Truex Jr. had a very solid year. Denny Hamlin as well. Denny Hamlin was one of the top drivers much of the season. And, Kyle Busch was quiet and did not win until a Texas race that was rained out twice. It's that season I hold against Kyle Busch in a big way. Between that, the bushwhacking and such is reasons why I have to keep Kyle Busch at number 9. And I'm trying not to sound like Skip Bayless talking about LeBron. I know that's what I'm doing right now, but that is why I will still stick to my guns. If Kyle Busch wins another championship, I'll move him up for sure. But right now, I hold him at 9.
But what if he gets to win every season? Because that's the thing you mentioned. Richard Petty dropped off towards the end of his career. Kyle Busch has never dropped off. Even in his rookie years, he was still competing for top 5s and in not racing for a championship. He was in the conversation, even all the way back to his rookie year when he was in the 5.
Well, then I think we also have to consider how long he races into the depths of his career. How long is he going to stick around? How long is he going to be out there? Is he going to push it? Richard Petty stayed around for way too long. Jimmy Johnson, I wouldn't say stayed around for way too long. He just had a bad last 2 years.
He lost his sponsorship.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. He lost clothes.
And let's not forget, I know Kyle Busch is going to have sponsors next year, but he's losing the backing that he's had since 2008 with M&M's. And that is going to be huge. He's still going to have interstate batteries. We know Joe Gibbs Racing is going to find a way. They are the best sponsored team in NASCAR by far. But I just don't know what we're going to get from Kyle Busch beyond this year. He's been great this year. I will say it. I mean, besides Chase Elliott, to me, he's been the second most consistent driver in the Cup Series this season. But in terms of all-time rankings, between 2020, the bushwhacking, the personality, the drama early in the first really 9 years of his NASCAR career, I can't put Kyle Busch in the top 5 right now. But I think we'll come back to this debate another time. It has been a very fun and lengthy episode of Sports Speak. Here live, we don't have a fun background. All you see is like the exit map in case there's a fire in the hotel. But we are here in Yonkers, New York, having fun here on SportsSpeak episode 103. A reminder that you can always follow along on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live, our NASCAR pick'em. Tim's getting close to me because I've had a bad last couple of weeks with my picks. So you can follow along, see what happens with New Hampshire, and find out when we'll have our next episode. We got more planned this summer, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, I'm Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
And I hope you enjoyed SportsSpeak. Have a great rest of your weekend.